Hello and welcome to episode 5 of The Racer's Edge, coming to you again from the offices of F1 Racing at Haymarket in Teddington, Surrey, England. Beautiful evening here, lots to discuss, lots going on. The plan tonight is to go through every Formula One team, every Formula One car and analyse it, see what's going on. And we do so, of course, in the context of this weekend's UBS Chinese Grand Prix at Shanghai, round 3 of the FIA Formula One World Championship. Nobody better to do that with than my colleague, my dear friend, our technical observer extraordinaire, Craig Scarborough. Craig, welcome to The Racer's Edge. Good to see you. Looking so fit and well.
I'm feeling fantastic, thank you.
Brilliant to see you. Right, before we get on to anything, let's just think a little bit about Malaysia. And we've been talking a lot about Sebastian Vettel, Mark Webber. And it just so happens in the last few minutes, we've received a video from Infinity. So thank you to everybody at Infinity for sending that, of Sebastian looking back at the Malaysian Grand Prix. So I'm assuming, like you, that big apology here. He's going to tell us the race in which he's going to let Mark Webber pass to win.
Yes.
And we're going to get a full feel for how he's going to go into the Chinese Grand Prix. So let's listen to this short video of Sebastian Vettel talking about Malaysia.
Well, how do I feel? I think generally, unfortunately, people didn't see that we performed well on the day. As a team, I think we did a very good job. We got a fantastic result. I think we had a very strong weekend in Australia already, but maybe didn't get quite the result we wanted. But in Malaysia, I think we were surprised again to being at the top, racing at the top, and the whole race. I think we worked excellently well with the tires, etc. So I think that's what people forgot. Obviously, what stuck to their heads is the way the race ended. But I think, as I said, there's not much more to add than what happened. I told the team straight after. I apologized for putting myself above the team, which I didn't mean to do. But there's not much more to say really. I don't apologize for winning. I think that's why people employed me in the first place and why I'm here. I love racing, so and that's what I did.
I think we must have an audio problem or something, because I heard him say, correct me if I'm wrong here, I've apologized to the team for putting myself in front of the team.
Sure.
And then I think he said, I don't apologize for winning.
No.
Bit of a weird one, that.
How does that work both ways?
Yeah, quite funny, isn't it, the minds of racing drivers. You've got to give Sebastian, I guess, reasonable credit for using the A word, apologizing, more than Didier Pironi ever did, as I said last week. But at the same time, how's Mark Webber going to feel when Sebastian Vettel says, I make no apologies for winning, when Mark Webber could have won that race, and should have won that race, and was going to win that race, and had backed off in order to win the race? So, a bit surprising there. What's your take on that, Scarbs?
I mean, my opinion is probably the same as most other people's, and Vettel is just an employee at the end of the day. He does what he's told. He doesn't have all the facts available. He should have stayed in position behind Mark Webber. That's the way the race was run, the arrangement the team have. So, what he said there really means nothing, does it? I mean, I think it can happen all over again. There won't be much trust between the two drivers now, as if there was much to start with, but certainly not now.
Well, I think there's something that... Well, there's two things we need to clear up. One is that Sebastian's saying, people have forgotten how good a job we did. I haven't forgotten. I don't think anybody's forgotten, least of all his opposition. They certainly haven't forgotten. So I'm not quite sure what that was all about, trying to remind us what a great job they did with the time management, etc. Well, one of the reasons Adrian Newey actually wanted everyone to back off, these two drivers to back off, is he was unsure about the tyre cycle and whether or not they were going to fall off a cliff. So a little bit strange, I think, those comments from Sebastian. But again, thank you to Infinity for making that happen. It was nice to see that. And he's been out there in China doing lots of stuff in his new role. And we saw an Infinity parked in the background there. Just how that happened to be parked there right next to the interview scene.
It worried me at first why he was doing an interview behind a parked car. Then the connection came to me that it's an Infinity parked there.
And thanks everybody for tweeting. And we're using Twitter at the moment for our question system for the show. We will be refining that in a couple of weeks. So stay with us on that one. But we got lots of questions coming in. And one of them is opposite, I think, to the Sebastian situation. It's whether or not we think Nico Rosberg will continue to play the role that he played in Malaysia. It's a very good question, actually. And actually, on the Mercedes YouTube channel, there's a little video from Nico in which he talks about how he actually says, I feel terrible after this race. I felt as if I could have had a better result, and I was driving to team orders, but that's what you have to do, and I'm looking forward to China now. And of course, he won in China last year. But I think it does come down to character and personality, doesn't it? And ultimately, Nico, to me, does look like a team player, a guy who's unlikely to want to break out of his shell. But I don't know how you see that, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I think he did the right thing. One of the most interesting things, I was watching some clips of the race the other day, and when he parked up in Park Ferme, he says, "Remember this one, guys." So I think he's expecting payback, and despite lots of comments in the press, I think that Mercedes are an equal team, and the team orders that Ross Brawn enforced is ones that he's enforced throughout his career. We remember at Ferrari, it was always after the last stop, you hold station. Now, invariably, it was Michael Schumacher in front during those years, but it's a sensible way. When the race is spaced out and you're not under threat, you hold station. You know, those cars, those engines have still got to do another 2 or 3 races, and the gearboxes and all the other parts on the car. So, you know, there is a reason behind doing this. It's not that they don't want everyone just to go out and race as fast as they can.
And particularly at this stage of the year, where there are so many unknowns, particularly on the tyre side.
Yeah, they probably had new race engines in the cars this weekend. Their gearboxes were probably on their second gearbox. Their second race. So they've got to look after all of this stuff. And obviously, you said the tyres were still very much an unknown factor, with Melbourne being a bit of a topsy-turvy race. Indeed, Sepang was with the weather. We still haven't had that end-to-end dry race or fully dry weekend. Hopefully, we'll get it this weekend. But China never always threatens some rain at some point. So yeah, there's still lots of unknowns, and you know, it's great. And as purists, we'd all want everyone to go out and race every lap of every Grand Prix, but you know, the cars in the world aren't that way, so they do have to conserve things sometimes.
And I think it's a shame in a way that in Formula One we don't address the quality of a really good number 2 driver and what that means. It means being a driver quick enough to win a Grand Prix, good enough to win a Grand Prix if the other guy has a problem.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, being a great team player. And there have been drivers like that. Riccardo Patrese springs to mind. Richie Ginther was another one. And to some extent, some of the teams already are kind of in that situation by default. But today, it's not fashionable to be a great number 2 driver. You've got to be a number 1, and every team has got to try and have 2 equal number 1s. And I think they're kind of missing the point, because if you win a drivers' championship well, with a well-balanced driver pairing, usually the Constructors' Championship takes care of itself.
Absolutely, yeah.
And if you try to take the other approach, maximum points from both cars, it usually ends in tears, as we've seen many times in the past. So it's a shame, I think, that the Richie Ginthers and the Riccardo Patreses, to some extent, are looked down upon these days. And Felipe Massa, when he was not as quick as he is right now, but when he was going through that slump last year, a lot of people were jumping on his back saying, oh, he's got to go, he's not quick enough, let's get Hulkenberg, let's get this and that. Actually, as I tried to say throughout the year, he was playing a great support role to Fernando Alonso. So, lots of questions coming in. But before we get too out of sync with the time frame that we got, and maybe we can try to go on for longer than an hour tonight because we've got so much to get through. Let's start going through the team scarves. I think we've got a picture we can bring up of the Red Bull just to get us in the mood of that car, and your thoughts on where it's at the moment, what they'll be looking for in China, and indeed, was the advantage we saw on Red Bull's side in Malaysia a true indication of their superiority?
Again, we've had 2 very topsy-turvy races with the weather and very different tracks as well. Red Bull are clearly on the pace. We can't take anything away from them in that respect. The car is very much a development of the car that finished the last race at the end of last year. The concern still is that when a Red Bull are going to find a big more chunk of time in the car, what are they going to have to do? A B-spec version of the car at some point in order to maintain pace with everyone else, who probably haven't got their all-new cars working quite as well as Red Bull. So, you know, I think certainly until we get to maybe the Spanish Grand Prix, Red Bull should have a very clear advantage because they've got the car that's just working at the moment. Some question marks over their tyre management. You know, they were in fuel conservation mode in China, and they were worried about tyres.
In Malaysia.
Sorry, Malaysia. Yeah. For some reason, I get the 2 tracks. They always seem very similar in my mind.
Yeah.
So I think Red Bull, you know, clearly have got the pace at the moment, and you know, seem to have got everything sorted out early. Going to be critical this weekend in China because the car doesn't tend to show a lot of top-end speed, as much as Red Bull have had a fantastic record at China. The long straights and the lower speed corners, may not play into the car's natural strengths, which is its high speed corner performance. So they could be under some pressure at this weekend.
And as I keep beating the drum, the Mercedes engine, when we start to get to these longer straights, I think we've seen historically over the past 4 or 5 years how good that engine is. And I know that it was an artificial situation with tyre finding a perfect spot, perfect window for the tyre with last year with Nico and indeed Michael. Nonetheless, that Mercedes engine will start to look pretty good, I would have thought, in China.
I think China would be a race where we would be looking very much at the Mercedes engines cars, who tend to run very high top speeds. Curiously, Toro Rosso is another one of those teams that tend to have a very high top speed. I don't think they've got the balance through the rest of the corners to maybe challenge this weekend, but it will bring them up unnaturally through the order.
Yeah, we'll get onto them later in the show, but it looks as if they've kind of adopted the mantle that Force India used to have. They used to be incredibly quick in a straight line. Mind you, their balance was usually not bad as well. But Toro Rosso have kind of taken that over now. We see them more frequently at the top of the speed tracks than Force India. Why is that, I wonder? What is there about that car with its Ferrari engine that...
I don't know. I think it's the way they choose to set the car up.
You don't think it's an inherent...
I don't think it's anything inherent because the Ferrari last year certainly a lot of the time showed a very low top-end speed. Sauber were never ones to capture the headlines. Clearly Toro Rosso, historically, over the past few years, have...
Interesting point, though. James Key was at Force India when they were quick in a straight line, and now James Key is at Toro Rosso and they're quick in a straight line. So one wonders whether that's part of his blueprint.
Yeah, could be.
His DNA.
Could be. They choose to run a low drag car.
All right, let's move on to McLaren. Lots of question marks about McLaren still. Lots of positive stuff coming out of the team, out of Jensen. But then they would be, wouldn't they? I mean, there's no way now the team or Jensen would be saying we're still really in trouble. We don't know where we're going.
There's lots of mixed messages. They're saying there are big problems with the car, but equally they're saying we'll be a winning team. We're going to be a factor in the championship this year. They've been very quiet on the specifics of where the problem lies, and obviously lots of people having stabs at the problem, trying to understand what's going on, maybe trying to overanalyze exactly where the problem lies to be very specific. But yeah, the car has an inherent problem that was obviously through testing where we don't tend to see the true pace, but equally that first Jerez test when Button set some blinding times, I think on the first day it was, and that transpired to be a setup problem on the car that was running the car far too low and skewed the test results. So we were all thinking that McLaren had the pace and then had gone off to do other types of testing. There will be new parts on the car this weekend. It's going to be interesting to see what parts they do change, because obviously this is going to start to suggest where the fundamental problem lies. One thing that I, in my mind, is quite clear is the problem isn't with the suspension, which lots of people are pointing at. Obviously, as if you remember, when we was at the McLaren launch, we spoke lots about the pull rod front suspension. That inherently, either its aerodynamics or its mechanical effect on the way the suspension actually works, it's not the problem. And we saw in Melbourne, and in particularly in Melbourne, but then in Malaysia, the car was very stiff. Now, they're not setting the car up stiff because that's the way the suspension works. They're actually choosing to lock the car into a very narrow operating window in terms of its ride height and the roll and the pitch, because the aerodynamics are just too pitch sensitive. So as the car moves about on the track, as it corners and brakes and accelerates, the aerodynamics are on the undersurfaces of the car. So the front wing, the turning vanes, the floor, and then the diffuser aren't working in a wide range of attitudes. And this is inherently where their problem is. And a lot of people have then started to point at the diffuser. But if we actually think that the diffuser, the most important thing about that is how the air is fed to that from the front of the car. So McLaren will be looking at things like the detail of the front wing and then the detail of the turning vanes, which we've already seen change over testing and through the first few races, barge boards, and then they've changed very much the front shape of the side pods, which is new for them this year. So probably those areas where they start to tweak, and eventually we'll see McLaren obviously gain more downforce and be able to run the car much softer, so the car can move about and get more mechanical grip. But I think very much the problem is at the front end of the car and not at the rear. So if you think about the sort of track that Melbourne is, it's very much a front end track. It's lots of medium speed corners that need lots of turning. And if the front end of the car isn't working very well, you're going to have a really low pace at Melbourne. Equally, Sepang, very smooth, no really fast challenging corners. The car was much improved, but I think that was much more to do with the circuit than it was to do with major improvements to the car. But we'll expect to see them have a significant step forwards in China. As we said, lots of straights, no corners that are really going to challenge the car and unearthed any particular problem. So we should see them be far more competitive this weekend.
Yeah, and I touched upon this business of running as stiff as they are running in the show last week, and indeed Ferrari doing a very similar thing, and Fernando Alonso not liking that stiff setup as much as Felipe Massa, and I suspect it's the same with Jenson Button. If Jenson's got a choice of having a bit of suspension compliance or being rock solid, he's going to go for the compliance for sure, because he's that sort of driver. So again, and we made the comment last week, don't be surprised to see Perez relatively near Jenson in the next few races until they get that sorted. Lots of questions coming in. Thank you very much. Comment from Gabor says, everybody remembers Ayrton Senna in a romantic way and is furious about Sebastian Vettel, but he's just doing exactly the same things. Well, I actually don't agree with that. I don't ever remember Ayrton being second in a race in which McLaren had been told to hold station and then disobeying team orders and passing Alan Prost when Alan Prost wasn't racing. Whenever they were racing together, they were both racing. That's the point. None of us have a problem with that. None of us have a problem, I think, with bad boy racing drivers disobeying team orders if they're both racing and maybe even having a shunt. I mean, we don't like it. We take the Alistair Corbell view. You're not allowed to do that. You're a prat if you do that. But that's what bad boys do. This is a different thing. This is the leader of the race being told to back off, no longer race, and the guy behind him passing him. Thinking he's actually made a clean pass. Ayrton never did that.
It's almost
Ayrton
an honesty.
never did that.
It's an honesty thing.
Yeah. That's a different thing. And that's where Sebastian, I think, maybe in his own mind, he's got it perfectly sorted and he knows exactly where he stands in his own mind or sits in his own mind. But I think the more he says to people, I've apologized to the team, I shouldn't have done it, but I don't apologize for winning and I'm a racing driver, the more confused he's actually going to get in his mind, because the reality is what he should be apologizing for is winning, because that was Mark Webber's win. That is the point. And that is, I think, there's still going to be confusion about that. I'm sure people will talk about that forevermore. But anyway, let's move on to Mercedes because they look very strong and they've got reliability now, which is something that touch their wood, which we haven't seen from Mercedes for a while now. But two cars running pretty rock solidly to the finish. Having said that, not too much reliability in Melbourne if you take the overall weekend. A few glitches going on. Nico had that gearbox problem, and then he had the electrics problem in the race, didn't he? Something to do with the battery or the on switch, I think. I can't remember what the final solution was. It was some weird thing. But anyway, they found their reliability in Malaysia. And the question is now, Scub, where are they? What's their room for improvement?
I think, again, they're one of these, Red Bull have got a very similar car to last year. Mercedes have updated their car quite significantly. And I think the aerodynamics that they've changed to the car, they've obviously got these Coanda exhaust, which they didn't really get to run properly last year. He's had lots of performance. And I think they've just rethought the way the aero works and created largely a conventional car, which over the past few years they've not really been able to do in terms of its layout and the aerodynamics. They were trying lots of clever things that didn't really pay off. They've really hit the nail on the head, and I think there's going to be a lot more pace to come out of that car this year as the season goes ahead. And at the back end of this year, I think we could be seeing periods where Mercedes could be dominating races, for a number of races on the trot.
Good. So my prediction, Lewis Hamilton.
Oh yeah, I won't go quite as far as a championship phase. I think maybe this year it will be their ebbing and flowing. Pace will probably be the thing that scuppers the championship. But certainly in terms of outright pace, their peaks are going to be much higher this year and more frequent than they were last year.
Now, 2011, you uncovered. I think you're one of the first to uncover the interlinked suspension system on the Mercs, and we were a little bit in a quandary as to whether they were continuing with that in 2013 with Aldo Costa there, obviously now doing a lot of the suspension design. And the word back from Malaysia we heard was that yes, they are.
Yes. And
you've got more details on that now.
Yeah, this is what the German media are calling the Frick system, which is the front-rear interconnected suspension. And this is something people have only really picked up on this year, but as you say, it's something that they've been running since at least 2011 when we first had a look at it. And we can have a very straightforward look at the system here. Conventional race cars have springs and dampers looking after each corner of the car, and anti-roll bars and heave elements and lots of bits of metal and passive hydraulics inside. What Mercedes have done is they've effectively thrown away all of those springs and dampers and replaced this with a fully interconnected hydraulic system, which is very much like the passive systems that we saw in the early 90s. But this is completely passive. And what you see here is the layout of the car Rather than having springs and dampers, as I said, you have these 3 sets of hydraulic cylinders each end of the car, and you have the 2 yellow ones, which are left and right, and these control the car's roll. So they're very similar to the anti-roll bars. And then the green systems, which link across each axle, and then they're linked front to rear, they then control the pitch, so like the way the car dives under braking and squats under acceleration. And having these systems completely interlinked means that you can actually control things that you can't do with a conventional mechanical suspension. So, for example, as I say, when the car brakes, normally the nose would dive and you'd lose front ride height, the splitter starts hitting the ground, creates all sorts of problems for the car, particularly with the legality of the plank that wears away underneath the car. With this system, as you brake, the front hydraulic cylinder compresses. That then sends the fluid down the pipes, as you can see there in green on the car, to the rear hydraulic element, and that also then compresses the rear suspension. So the car keeps the same attitude. It may lose ride height, but it will actually keep the car much more stable to the ground. It will never keep the car consistent because, you know, it's not a fully active system. It can't have pumps that keep the car pressed up as they did like at Williams during the sort of the championship.
How have you got
years.
all that information, Scarbs?
Well, the story actually goes back much further. I mean, Team Renault actually introduced what was probably a correctly termed a frick system back in 2009. They tested it through the previous year, and this was a very simple system that sat over the top of the conventional mechanical system and just linked the front heave damper to the rear heave damper to prevent this dive under braking, which is one of the key things that the aerodynamicists want to control. So we knew about that system already back in 2009. Then we saw some pictures of the Mercedes car in 2011. It was actually the gearbox. And you could see that it didn't have torsion bars and dampers and all the other complicated bits of mechanical suspension. It just had 2 cylinders with 2 hydraulic pipes coming out to a spherical accumulator. Bingo.
Yeah.
The system was unveiled. And these systems, I mean, they're on cars. You probably remember the Hydrogas Minis of the 1960s.
We had one.
Citroens,
Hydrolastic suspension, it was called.
Yeah, an Austin 1300 had hydrolastic as well.
It was a great car.
All of
white,
these
white Mini we had, blue upholstery, hydrolastic. It was called a Mini Deluxe. It was in Australia.
Deluxe, yes.
Yeah.
So, you know, these systems aren't F1 specific. What Mercedes have been able to do over these past few years, I mean, maybe some of their tyre problems over the past few years and some of the lack of pace has been getting this system to work, to get it to tune. Because obviously, it's not like a conventional system. It's not like you just go replace a spring, replace a damper. Now you're pumping up hydraulic pressure. You're adjusting the flow control valves in the hydraulic lines to produce the same effect. It's very complicated.
But when they were running double DRS, no wonder they were getting confused on everything.
Well, yeah,
with
again,
all that stuff going on as well.
This was probably the only concept they've carried forwards from the previous years that
Yeah.
hasn't been outlawed. And it's quite important to note that Mercedes are the only team running this completely passive hydraulic system. Other teams have still got conventional springs and anti-roll bars and dampers, but use the simpler front to rear connection, which is just a very simple setup. Even teams like Williams and Force India are planning to introduce those simpler systems this year. Majority of teams have already got them. I don't know if any other team yet are planning to move to one of these fully passive systems like Mercedes are running. So at the moment, they've kind of got a march on the development.
We live in a world of we've got to keep the costs down, we've got to keep everything as uncomplicated as possible, but keep the technology. One wonders if Mercedes really start to use this to advantage, where this will end in terms of regulations. But a good question coming in from at MA Harry's on Twitter. If the purpose of interlinked passive suspension is acceptable, would it not be cheaper to allow active suspension? Less tuning required. And I think Paddy Lowe hit on this.
Paddy Lowe suggested this as one of the rule changes.
Yeah.
Even the mechanical suspension, although the parts get carried over a lot from year to year and the teams can make many of the parts, which obviously keeps the costs down, these are mechanical systems being used in very complicated ways. You've got these inerter dampers, you've got roll dampers, you've got sometimes they would run no springs on each wheel, they'll run a central spring and damper instead. Lots of clever things. It takes lots of development, lots of design time, lots of testing ideally. You could throw all of that away and use the hydraulic systems that are already on the car powering the gearbox and the steering and all the other electro-hydraulics they've got and put an active suspension in. It would be so much cheaper for the teams. There obviously would be an initial step in development cost to get it going, but running it from there on, as long as it was controlled through the FIA ECU, which would prevent them doing anything too clever, because obviously that once you have got computer control of all 4 corners of the car, you could do pretty much anything. So with some basic rules set in a logic of the ECU, it would be a far better way of doing things. And I wouldn't be surprised a few years down the road that this actually gains some traction and gets introduced.
Traction being the operative word, of course. But of course, we should remind viewers of why active ride was banned. And it was banned because it was too quick. Not from cost reasons or anything else.
And it wasn't a driver aid in the way that people maybe assumed it was.
But it was a panic reaction. FW14B Williams was just a brilliant car in every dimension. And Adrian Newey, Paddy Lowe, Patrick Head combo, and Neil Oakley in there, I think, as well. And what was Neil? No, Neil wasn't with the team then. But anyway, a brilliant car. So they just banned everything they could to do with the FW14B. But as Scarbs correctly says, it was a panic reaction, and that wasn't something that was so integral in terms of its pace. There were many other reasons for that. So watch this space, and it'll be very interesting to see how well the Mercs go, I think, this weekend. My gut feeling is they'll go very well.
Yeah.
And they certainly won't go any worse than they did in Malaysia. What we don't know, of course, is how Kimi would have gone in Malaysia. He looked very quick early on Friday, and then the weekend kind of unraveled for him. He had that weird business with impediment in qualifying, and then that set him back. Then he was in the midfield, and in those conditions, it was very difficult for him to do anything about that. So where do we see Lotus F1 now? Let's bring Lotus F1 up.
Again, one of the teams that's come very quick out of the blocks. Bits of the car are very similar to last year, particularly around the front end and the suspension, but they've got a very new aerodynamic setup on the car, and it just seems to be working. The car's very good with its tyres. I don't know if China is a circuit that's going to reward the car as much as others, but if they can go fast here, that bodes really well for Lotus's season, because they're going to be the consistent team, it looks like, throughout every race. One of the drivers is going to be there or thereabouts, and particularly Kimi was looking strong despite, as you say, an unfortunate race in Malaysia.
I suppose one of the worries at Lotus F1 might be the future of James Allison, and how long can they keep him there in that team. A lot of discussion in the paddock area in Melbourne and Malaysia about James having received a McLaren offer, a Ferrari offer. At the moment, he's staying where he is, but who knows if he's going to be there next year. And that must be not a concern, but it certainly has to be taken into account when we think about that team. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of people have already pointed out that James Allison will be going to replace Paddy Lowe at McLaren, but Tim Goss has taken that role. So
and
there's not a job going there.
Exactly.
So I wonder how much of this is just people, holding the cards of the technical directors and going, well, where can we shuffle them now? I think James is in a pretty good position at Lotus, and
he is, providing the money's still there and it's coming through. And it's solid.
I think the key thing for Lotus is budget.
And I think from James's point of view, he likes the people there. He knows them. He's been with that team for a while. He knows how to make work and how to do a car.
There is very much a Lotus family, isn't there?
Yeah. As the lights start to go out here a little bit at Haymarket, I think it's because we've got passive sensors, but we're going to be. We're going to send Scarbs over to make sure the lights stay on, actually. It's a good moment because at this point in the show, I want to talk to, I was speaking earlier to a very talented new driver on the scene from Belgium, Stoffel Vandoorne, who won last year's Eurocup 2.0 Formula Renault Championship, European Formula Renault to you and I, last year, and this year graduated to World Series by Renault 3.5, which along with GP2 is the category just below Formula One. He's a young guy, had his first race at Monza. It was a double-header weekend. He won the first, finished third in the other. He was brilliant from beginning to end. And he also had to manage in that first race a really badly flat-spotted left front Michelin. All credit to Michelin that the tyre finished the race. There's a photograph in the video, which is about to show you, of the chat, which Stoffel actually took himself in Parc Ferme and put it out on Twitter. He had the wit to do that. It is amazing how badly damaged that tyre was. And anyway, so this is Stoffel Vandoorne, who made his name at Monza last weekend, round 1 and 2 of World Series by Renault.
Stoffel, thanks very much for joining us, and sincere congratulations. What a way to start your 3.5 career. And I know it's a schmaltzy question, but did you ever imagine that you could win first time out in 3.5?
Well, I don't think I imagined I could win directly from the first race. I know winter testing has been really good for me, and I know I was at the front every time we went out. So I was kind of expecting running at the front, but winning in Monza at the first attempt, that was a bit too much to think about. So yeah, I'm very pleased I have done this result, and I hope I can keep this up for the season.
Well, it's amazing, and not only was it a great win, but you had that problem with the Michelin. Well, I say the problem with the Michelin. I mean, those of us that remember Michelin in Formula One remember the days when you could do a Grand Prix virtually with a blistered left front or whatever, and it's just amazing how you managed to keep that tyre together after flat spotting it like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was a very hard race. After about 8-9 laps, I flat spotted my tire, and there were still about 30 minutes to go in the race. And it was really bad. I had a lot of vibrations. I couldn't see anything anymore. I was getting a little bit sick in the car as well. And it was very hard for concentration as well. So and also I was thinking, I mean, it was hard because I was leading. I thought I had destroyed my chance of winning the race because Da Costa was catching up, but then he got a puncture as well. So from then on I could maintain the gap with Kevin Magnussen, who was second at that moment, because he also had a flat spot. But also I'm a bit surprised that the car stayed alive and that I didn't have a technical problem.
How actually did you flat spot the tyre?
Well, I just went a little bit forward with my brake balance, and my braking for turn 1 was quite safe. Every lap I went there, so I decided to brake a little bit later. And yeah, obviously it was a little bit too much, and I locked up massively my front left tire.
Stoffel, the start is always a nervous time of the race. Let's put it that way. But you made a beautiful start to that first race, and it looked as if you'd been doing it all your life. You just in control. You took the piece of road you wanted. You turned in using all the road. You weren't really looking at the mirrors very much, it seemed. You just looked completely in command of what you were doing. Just talk us through that. Yeah,
well, I hadn't done a practice start since winter testing, since the last winter test, so I was surprised I had such a good start. I know the right technique how to do it, because in race 2 I had a really good start as well, overtaking Antonio Felix da Costa. And yeah, I think I got the technique right, and once you got that, it's becomes an automatism, and you don't have to think about it anymore.
And it just felt to you like another motor race, I guess, in a way, even though this was a much bigger stage than any you'd ever been on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's obviously it's the next step in my career, World Series. I mean, I was a little bit nervous before the race, but I have to tell, I felt pretty okay. I thought it would have been worse.
And then the second race, you had a very, very close-up view of Antonio, of Kevin. Very good racing there. Tell us about those two guys and racing closely with them.
Yeah, we had a really great race. I had a really good start. I could overtake Antonio directly into the first corner. But then I tried to push a little bit too hard, trying to break the toe in Monza. And I made a mistake out of the last corner. So that allowed Antonio to get alongside me, and we went side by side in the first corner. My brakes weren't quite up to temperatures, so that's the reason why I went straight over the bumps and across the chicane. And when I went over the bumps, the anti-stall system came in, so that's why Antonio and Kevin they passed me. But that was still, it wasn't the end of it. So we were still battling for the rest of the next 2 laps, and were several times side by side. But in the end, it was Antonio who got the upper hand, and Kevin who was second. I was lacking a little bit of pace in the beginning, and afterwards we were running like similar pace. But I mean, it was a great race because we were pushing really hard, and it was almost 29 laps of qualifying.
Just sensational stuff. Where are you speaking to us from, Stoffel?
From Belgium, from my home.
And tell us a little bit about your life, those trophies in the background.
Yeah.
Exactly where you live, etc., etc.
Yeah, well, I live near Bruges. Yeah, well, those trophies you can see in the background, they are obviously from last weekend, from Monza. I enjoy being at home now. It's always nice to have a bit of to relax a little bit between the races. Because we're not spending a lot of time at home.
I know what I think about Richard Dutton. I mean, what a guy. He's running, I think, 8 championships this year, 20 different drivers. But what a job he's doing in World Series. What a team. Tell us a little bit about Fortec.
Yeah, sure. I mean, he's running a very big team. They have a lot of drivers in their team, and I think it must not be easy to run all those kind of categories and being successful in all of them. Richard, he wasn't in Monza, unfortunately, because he was at the Formula Renault 2-liter race in Hockenheim. But anyway, the team they did a really great job. We didn't have mechanical problems, and I mean they delivered the car I want. So it's really a great way to start the season.
And you're now a McLaren young driver as well. What sort of response have you had from Woking?
Well, they were really happy. They followed my results as well during the weekend. They watched the races, so they were happy about the results. And I think also they couldn't imagine a better start of the season. But I need to work on those little details that can make me win again now, and try to keep this up for the future.
Well, you're right up there with another of the young drivers, Kevin Magnussen, and obviously Antonio Felix da Costa, another driver you've got to beat over the season. Next race at Motorland, lovely circuit in Spain. Bet you're looking forward to that.
Yeah, sure. We were really quick there in winter testing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's maybe not my favorite track, but I know we're gonna have a good car there. And anyway, there is a championship race there, so you have to make the best of it.
Stoffel Vandoorne, 21 years old. Remember the name. That guy's full of calm confidence. Very, very fast. And what a debut for him in World Series by Renault. I don't know, Scarbs, if you got to see the races on here in England. They were shown on Eurosport. Very good coverage. Tom Gaymore, got to congratulate him. He picked up that flat spot on the tyre long before the TV editor did, the director. And thanks to Tom also for that picture he managed to extract from Twitter from Stoffel. So very good stuff. Ferrari, let's get back onto the Formula One track. Ferrari, I spoke last week about how information coming out from Ferrari suggests that they're pretty stiff, and that's one of the things Fernando's not that comfortable with. So there's a bit of a parallel there between Ferrari and McLaren.
Yeah, I mean, their car last year, if we remember, actually started out being very pitch sensitive to the point where it was actually making the car completely unstable under braking. I don't think they've got the problem like that this year. But again, they've got quite a different car, and they're just learning it. So there's lots of potential in there, and I think Melbourne was a fairly good result. Massa, I mean, the acid test is Massa's having a good season already, which tends to suggest that the car isn't too far off the pace, and it's fairly benign in its characteristics. So,
well, we shouldn't forget they qualified second and third in Malaysia as well. So in terms of one lap pace as well as everything else,
which has
there.
been their bugbear. So again,
they were ahead of Mark Webber in qualifying.
We need to see it on the weekend and see how the car going. There's new parts coming on the car this weekend. I mean, already we've seen lots of iterations of front wings. They had quite a different diffuser on the car in Malaysia as well, which is quite interesting. Strangely copying an idea off of Mercedes, which it's always interesting to see ideas
on the diffuser.
On the diffuser, yeah, a little extra channel built above the diffuser underneath the tail light, which just gives you a little bit of extra extraction of the air under the car, a little bit more downforce. All these little tweaks constantly going on between the teams. So yeah, I mean, I think Ferrari, they need to put in a good solid weekend this weekend. Probably more so than the other teams, because I think if they don't get the early part of the season going, I think they're going to struggle to get some momentum through the year.
Yeah, Fernando's got to he's got to out-qualify Felipe in China, and he's got to get a serious result in China.
He's got to get some points on the
board.
board.
Let's hope things go well for him. A bit of a mistake, I think, in Malaysia in not coming in. And what was your thought on that? On the
well, I mean, obviously it was a simple error on the first or second corner, I think, when he finally went into the back of, was it Webber or Vettel? I can't remember. It was Vettel. Yeah. But it was a complete error not coming into the pits at the end of that lap. It was quite clear the car wasn't going to make it around another lap. He would have been at the back, almost at the back of the grid by that stage anyway. So
and he could have switched tyres and gone out.
He could have switched tyres, or
great shame.
Even if he had dropped to the back of the field and then had to come in again when the time was right for tyres, he could have had a clear track and caught that time up very, very quickly. So kind of schoolboy error from Ferrari as a team. I don't think we can blame it solely on Fernando because I didn't hear the full radio interchange with them. But yeah, it was
Well,
always going to be an
they
accident.
made it very clear that it was a team decision in conjunction with Fernando. So at least they're working harmoniously in terms of the PR,
Yes.
if nothing else. Just a couple of bits of Ferrari news. We sadly lost recently Giulio Bossari, one of the all-time great mechanics in the Formula One pit lane, synonymous with Ferrari. Look at any pictures of the Ferraris in the 60s, late 50s, and there in his light brown overalls with the dark complexion, Giulio Bossari, the archetypical mechanic. And he passed away in his 90s, so what a lovely life he led. And also if you're in Italy or somewhere near Italy, coming up very soon, the Ferrari Formula One show to end all Ferrari Formula One shows at the Enzo Ferrari Museum in Modena. That's being put together by our friend Jonathan Giacobazzi. So it's not a Ferrari F1 show. It is a show about Ferrari in Formula One put together by lots of Ferrari people and examples of many, many Formula One cars from the years past. So if you're anywhere near that area, check it on the internet. The dates will be there. It's a show coming up in Modena, Italy. Right, next on the list, I'm pleased to say, actually, is Force India, really, in terms of their performance and what they're doing. When we looked at that car initially, we thought it was a fairly conventional car, but a drivable, raceable car, and so it's proved to be.
Absolutely, yeah, but they're clearly the best of the rest at the moment. A lot of people have looked at the car and says, well, it's last year's car. And I think we picked up at its launch, it was actually a completely new car, but they weren't going out on a limb with lots of new different concepts. They were really just working with what they knew already. And they spent a lot of time at the end of last year understanding the car. And they've spent much of the testing running the car in a very similar setup to we've seen in the races, just understanding it. And that's really paid off. That car is working at its peak already. And the way it uses the tyres, and with the two drivers they've got there, really is setting the midfield pace. And this weekend should be really good for them. And you can really see them getting a big haul of points this weekend.
However, we know how hard it is to find a tenth of a second here, a tenth of a second there, how much money can be spent development time. But to lose both cars due to the same mechanical problem in one Grand Prix must really, really hurt. Just talk us through that issue with the hubs.
If we remember, the Force Indias came in at their pit stops and had extended pit stops, and eventually the cars were stopped. What was happening is, as we've seen a lot over the previous few years, teams are no longer having separate wheel nuts to the wheels, so that when you put the wheel on, you then got to locate the wheel nut onto the axle and then hit it with the wheel gun, tighten it up. Now the wheel nut is actually coaxially located in the wheel itself. And the way they do this is that you have the magnesium wheel, and then they have a metal sleeve which they press fit into the wheel, and inside that sleeve you then have the wheel nut with a little circlip that holds it on to stop it falling out. And what appeared happened that they had these are new for Force India this year. Lots of other teams have had them, and other teams have had issues with them. Mclaren, Lotus last year also had lots of issues, had a bit of a redesign. And what was happening is, in the heat and the stresses of the Malaysian race, that this sleeve that fits inside the wheel was sticking to the axle. So when they, with a big powerful wheel gun, unbolted the wheel nut was literally pulled out from this sleeve. They pulled the tyre off, and this metal sleeve was still on the axle. You can't put another tyre on because that sleeve is there. So they had to hammer that off, and this happened repeatedly at all of the stops. And it's not an insurmountable problem. It's one of those little detail engineer issues that the teams will forever keep working on. I don't think we'll see a repetition of those.
No, we won't see a repetition. It's just such a shame that it happened. And
they really were looking very...
and it's interesting that, dare I say it, nobody else has had that problem, or indeed had that problem having adapted over the winter and going through the heat in Malaysia. And it just shows we take a lot of reliability for granted, but it just shows how much work goes into every component of the car, every aspect of the car. And you've only got to get it slightly wrong. I mean, do you think that was a design thing, or do you think it was just going a little bit thin in some area from a weight point of view? How would you...
It's hard to know whether it might have been a manufacturing problem, which is possible because it happened to a number of wheels, or a design problem. Force India haven't, to be honest, really come out and explained it in detail.
No.
But it isn't a difficult problem to fix because this is a separate part to the wheel. It's not something fundamentally wrong with their stock of wheels. If you don't realise, teams have a massive stock of wheels. To replace them is a significant sum of money that no one wants to invest in, and no one wants to bring them back to the UK, remachine them and send them back off. They just want to sea freight them out. So I think it's just one of those little things that
the cynics amongst us would say that when a team puts out a press release saying we think we're on top of the problem and we won't say any more about it. Usually that means it was some sort of design problem, because if it was a manufacturing problem, they're not usually slow in saying that. But if it's a design problem, the team will get together and they don't want to expose any individual, which is the correct way to behave, of course.
That's fair.
And it doesn't really matter that it was, but it's just interesting to know, if nothing else. Lots of tweets coming in, most of them far too embarrassing to read, actually, but I'll read out some of them. Well, actually, this is quite a good question. Robbie Miculas, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, says, personally, which venue do you prefer to attend mostly in the Formula One calendar? What, Scarbs, if you had a carte blanche, go to one race, which would you go to?
If it was one race, it's tricky. I've never got to Monza. That's one of the races, one of the circuits I've not been to, and I would really like to go and see a race at Monza.
That's a bit like saying you've never had bacon and eggs. I mean,
yeah, I know, it's strange. Every year I make the effort to try and get to Monza, and every year I somehow fail. But probably if I had to only go to one race, I think Singapore is a pretty spectacular race to go and watch. Maybe outclassing someone like Monaco nowadays. I mean, I went there last year and it was massively impressive in every respect, and the spectacle of the cars under the lights was just brilliant.
I actually had a friend from the candy store in San Francisco here earlier, and he was asking a question on behalf of another friend in the candy store. He's going to Singapore, and which grandstand did I recommend? Well, I had to say, well, it was a bit of a bland answer, but any grandstand in Singapore is good, because you're looking down on the cars in this amazing light. But I suppose towards the end of the lap, there's usually quite a lot of action. That's where we saw Michael doing his thing last year. And there's usually a bit of stuff going on there. But anyway,
and there's good visibility throughout the track there, which is unusual, particularly for a street-type circuit, but even compared with some permanent circuits. So you get lots of chance to have a good look at the cars moving around the track there.
Me, I'd go for Australia, mate. Yeah, love Australia. Right. Slib Aaron on Twitter says, Stoffel Vandoorne, Mclaren junior driver, already a winner in 3.5. Kind of tells you everything you need to know, eh? You're quite right. The guy's definitely going to make it. JDUNNTHX500. Sorry, I can't pronounce your name. Mike Dudson would say, anybody with an unpronounceable name shouldn't have it pronounced. But anyway, thank you for your tweet. Says he loves that the show always gives young drivers a spot. And that's something that, well, why wouldn't we? They're all heroes, whether they're 1925 or 2013. They're all great guys, these people that get into racing cars and do their thing. Anday23 says, great show, guys. Keep it up. Thank you very much. And there's one here about Scarbs, actually, looking very svelte. Don't see that word particularly, and I'm not sure.
Not for journalists either.
It's the word that springs to mind when I think of Scarbs. But nonetheless, we have some fans here
saying that. That's good.
Saying that you're svelte, Scarbs. So thank you very much for that. Sauber.
Sauber really haven't disappointed so far this year.
Yeah, that's a lovely. The car looks really small. But I don't know if that's an optical illusion.
Obviously, as you can imagine, I've spent hours and hours since the last race poring over the detail photos that I've had for the first two races. And the more I look at the Sauber, the more little details come out at me. And it's just fantastic to look up close at this car.
Well, talking about up close, sorry to interrupt, but that photograph there, all of these photographs, by the way, LAT Photographic, thank you very much to the brilliance of the photographers there. That inside front is actually off the ground.
Yeah, that must be going into one of the first...
But yeah, it looks like going into turn 2.
There's a lot of gradient change, isn't there, in Malaysia?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, okay, you've spoiled it for me now. It is gradient. Trust you to find the reason for it. I was just about to say, wow, isn't that car stiff?
Yeah, there's a problem with
the suspension. You're right. It's probably a gradient element there. But it is actually off the ground. You don't see that often unless they're bouncing over the curb.
No,
so where are they?
I
tell you one thing. Sorry, I'm interrupting again. But the car is really quick in the wet. Have you noticed how quick, particularly Esteban Gutierrez has been in the wet in both Melbourne and in Malaysia? And usually, a quick car in the wet isn't, in the old days, was never that quick in the dry. It was a sign of chassis flex, but I suppose that's being very puerile.
Yeah. I just don't think they've got on top of the car yet. You can see massive potential in the car. And I think they've been disappointed with the results they've got. And I don't think they've quite unlocked the setup that makes the car really work in the dry conditions, which obviously, as you say, in the wet, the car seems to be more than capable of getting the performance in. So they tend to suggest they haven't really got the setup quite right. We've got some new parts coming this weekend. They've had a few little bits and pieces on the car over the first two races as well. Nothing major, just those usual bits and pieces. But the potential of that car is there, and they're really good. Hopefully they can unlock it, because I think it would be good to see that that car really put some
Well,
laps in.
We know that one of the elements is the Willem Toet smaller side pod assembly, for want of a better word, and you've described very accurately what's going on there. Possibly airflow, whatever it is. He's got very nice small entrances to the pods anyway. But that doesn't seem to be giving him any sort of advantage at the moment, or does
I think it's one of those things. I think we can all look at, it's got narrow side pods. It's not fast. It must be the narrow side pods. I think it's far more complicated.
Well, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it doesn't seem to be making them quicker, is what I'm saying.
And again, I think that, once they have worked out how to set the car up and get it to run, I think then that the side pods, and then they're clearly going to have more work around the exhaust area that will really start to drive the car's performance. They're still running quite an old specification front wing, which needs probably an update. I expect around the Spanish Grand Prix time, which is typically when most teams will bring their big updates. But hoping for better things from Sauber.
Now I'm going to annoy our producer and break the system yet again and say today there was a news announcement from Williams, and normally we wouldn't sort of do freebie ads like this, but it's worth talking about because Dominic Riley used to be the sponsorship manager at Williams, and he left the company, as they often do, to set up his own leather goods design company, for want of a better word. And interestingly enough, he got Patrick Head to go with him, not to leave the company with him, but as a shareholder and an investor in that company. And they've announced today their tie-up with Williams, supplying this upmarket luggage. And we've got a couple of pictures of it here. And there's Scarb's Mark II walking away from his
When I Had Hair,
from his Global Express with one of these very cool-looking bags, which remind me quite a lot of the 60s and a Les Leston track pack.
That's right,
which were leather in most parts. And there's Scarbs again with his other bag. And I think it looks great, that stuff. I know there's some other really good luggage out there, but it's good. And they've done well. They do a lot of interesting stuff. And that is a helmet bag. Very nice leather, obviously. But that is a helmet bag spec'd by Dickie Stanford, the team manager of Williams, because he said, I want a helmet bag, which actually takes a helmet plus a hands collar. And there it is. It's the first one, I think.
And I really want one of those. So
very nice, isn't it?
If anyone wants to buy me one.
Yeah, very nice. Well, anyway, I'm sure you can find all that online, and you can go to the bottom of it and see how much it all is. But it looks like very nice stuff. And the other thing, speaking of nice stuff, this is it's basically an iPad stand, but a very upmarket one, an Apple endorsed one. And this has come in from a viewer, Tom Murphy. Thank you very much, Tom. He wants me to pass it on to Alistair Caldwell, because last week, when Alistair was doing the interview on the iPad, it kind of made everybody a bit seasick because he was holding the iPad like this and talking, and every time he got excited, he moved the iPad. Bear with me, everybody. To get Alistair Caldwell on an iPad in the first place is an achievement. Actually, to get him to sit it carefully and still, that's the next step. Anyway, we've got that now. Thank you very much to Tom Murphy for sending that in. I'll get it straight over to Alistair Caldwell, and we'll talk to him again very soon, because I'm sure he's going to have a lot to say as the season develops, and there's all sorts of James Hunt, Nicky Lauda news develops, and McLaren news in general. Alistair's our man, and he did a great job on the show last week. So thank you to him. And Alistair, your freebie's coming fairly soon, courtesy of Tom Murphy. Right. Toro Rosso. We've talked a little bit about them and how quick they are in James Key settling in there pretty well.
Yeah, I think they're James Key obviously is starting just to learn the team. The team are now starting to learn the car, because they went quite a different design direction with this car. No longer it had the very undercut side pods that we saw last year. James Key has lots of very different ideas on how the suspension should be set up. So all the mechanics of the suspension have changed. And they're now just, obviously with two relatively inexperienced drivers, going through understanding how to set the car up. And they're being very open about this. They're not making any great apologies. They're just effectively learning their way. And one thing that James Key does like is a car that's very benign, unlike we've seen with the McLaren and the Ferrari. They've got a very narrow operating range. One of the things that James likes is a car that will work in lots of different circumstances across different tracks, high, low, downforce, all of those different settings. So we can expect the team to improve much more as the season progresses.
Yes, and the two drivers really, I think we've gone beyond the stage of saying they're inexperienced and they're young. There's no excuse really for these two guys to be anything other than what they're going to be. Yeah. And what we see is how quick they're going to be. And they kind of, Ricciardo does something here and Byrne does it there, and it's a nice looking team.
They matched off nicely against each other, aren't they?
But under the heading of what we were talking about earlier, in reality, both of them are probably going to develop to be very good number 2 drivers in a very good team at some point, and one wonders who would be the better number 2 driver. And that's an interesting observation, I think, to make as the season progresses, because Daniel Ricciardo must be sniffing a potential Red Bull drive. But
there's the right noise behind him, isn't there?
Yeah, but he's got to find that balance between being a guy who's going to be quick enough to win races if he needs to, if Vettel, who stays there, has a problem.
Yeah.
And there again, being the number 2 driver who will always support him, do everything that's right, and be there in his tyre tracks, and be Mr. Nice Guy. He's certainly Mr. Nice Guy, Daniel, so we'll see how that one develops, I think. Right. Now we go to another video, short video this one, because again, young drivers, I think, just as exciting as older drivers and indeed middle-aged drivers. And this is with Jack Hawksworth, who I'm very fond of because he is a typical young Englishman that had no money at all and made his name in karting and then Formula Renault in 2011. But found at the end of the year he didn't even have a budget to do the proper Formula Renault European Championship, which is expensive. And so this boy from Western Yorkshire went to America and got himself a drive in a series called Star Mazda, which is reasonably well sponsored. It wasn't a paid drive, I don't imagine, but it was a free drive. He didn't have to pay to get into the car. Dominated the championship last year, as a result of which he's now with a very good team, Schmidt-Peterson Motorsport, in Indy Lights, which is the category just below IndyCar. Now, do not think that Jack Hawksworth is resolved to just resign to driving only in America. This guy is hungry and he wants to race in Formula One. But this is the way he's doing it. And full credit, I think, goes to him for doing that, for having the initiative to do that. He's living in Indianapolis now. And we've had 2 rounds of the Indy Lights series. It's not very well contested. It's not large grids, but at the front, like all motorsport, it's very, very competitive. And he won the first race and finished second. And I chatted to him earlier today about those 2 results. Jack Hawksworth.
Jack, thanks for joining us. First time we've spoken to you while you've been in the States, I think, but good start to your season in Indy Lights with Sam Schmidt Motorsports.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Peter. It's good to be doing this, and yeah, we had a great start to the season. Enjoying racing in Indy Lights, enjoying living in Indianapolis, and being part of the Schmidt-Peterson Motorsport team. And yeah, we've had a really good start to the season so far. We've had a win and a second, and we were leading the points. So, in terms of results, it couldn't have gone much better, I guess.
First of all, tell us about the jump from Star Mazda to Indy Lights. How do the 2 cars compare?
Yeah, I think it's a big step. It's it's like you've got an extra 200 horsepower. The car's a lot heavier. It's a lot bigger. It's got a lot more aero grip. I'd say the biggest thing is the sheer size of the car. To be honest, it's a much heavier car, a much bigger car. And you can't throw it around quite as much as you could do with the Mazda. You've got to be a little bit more, I guess, respectful of it. And it's been quite a big learning curve jumping into this car, but it's still got 4 wheels. It still goes pretty quick. So enjoying it, and yeah, it's a lot of fun to drive. It's definitely more of a handful than the Mazda. Like it's quite an old car actually. I think the car's about 12 years old now. And so it's not got a flappy paddle, which we've still got a quick shift and stuff like that. So well, actually you have to lift off the throttle when you upshift and stuff. So there's a lot going on. It's quite a physical car, so a lot of fun and a big challenge as a driver.
So Jack, a good start to the year, obviously with that win at St. Pete, but it wasn't all plain sailing early on. Looks like you lost quite a lot of ground early in the race.
Yeah, no, that was a really entertaining race actually with St. Petersburg. We qualified on the front row, and I was able to get a good getaway. We have rolling starts in Indy Lights rather than the standing starts, which I guess are more traditional in European racing anyway. So I made a good start, tucked in behind the pole sitter, and I got a really good run down into turn 1, and he kind of left the door half open, and there was a gap there. It was very slippery on the inside, but I went for it anyway, and I locked up and ended up running wide and lost the position and lost another 2 positions in the process. So ended up back down in 4th, and then we had to fight our way back through the field. And the race was pretty mad with attrition, to be honest. So it was an entertaining race coming back through, and it just shows that anything can happen in racing, because I didn't expect when we were back down in 4th that we were going to end up winning that race.
Yeah, good job. And at Barber, a good job as well. But this guy Carlos Munoz looks pretty quick. And
they've been quick. Off the bat, they've been competitive everywhere. But yeah, I mean, Barber, we were pretty close again. I mean, we missed out on pole by 800ths of a second, and that 10th of a second here and that 10th of a second there. That's that's what wins and loses championships. So we need to work on that myself, and also as a package to make sure we can close the gap, and hopefully we can nick the pole at the next race, because I think, as everybody knows, track position is pretty vital, and once you lose the pole position, or you're starting on the outside, it's so difficult to have an impact on the race, because especially on the road course like Barber, it's very difficult to pass because of the just the way these cars are with the the aerodynamic grip and stuff. So yeah, he's been quick, and I think he looks strong this year. But I also think that we're kind of just winding it up at the minute, and I think that as the season goes on, we'll get stronger, and hopefully we can push on and grab a few more wins.
I hope you're enjoying Indianapolis, Broad Ripple, Eagle Creek. There's lots of nice places there.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, it's finally the weather's just started to pick up, so that's a little bit nicer. I mean, the first couple of months I've been out, it was absolutely freezing, so it made England seem tropical, to be honest. And
I doubt that. I find that very hard to believe.
It was really cold. It was like minus 12 when I was out here at the start, and that was like in the daytime, so it was pretty chilly. But yeah, now it's really picked up. I think it's about 20 degrees out there today, so it's nice to be in shorts and t-shirt again.
Well, you did a couple of ovals in Star Mazda. You got some ovals coming up, starting at Indy. You looking forward to the ovals?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be really good this year. Obviously, last year was a bit of an unknown because I'd never done anything like that before, so you kind of, was just feeling my way into it, I guess. And it was a big learning process over the two oval races I had. But this year, it's kind of like I've already got the foundation in place, the starting block. Obviously, different car, higher level, but I think it's going to be really good to go out there and attack the ovals this year, and to, instead of learning on them, go out there and obviously try to go win my first oval race, which would be fantastic.
Well, let's hope that happens very soon. Thanks for talking to us, Jack, and all the best. Say hi to Sam and all the boys.
Will do. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
Jack Hawksworth, another star in the making, no doubt about that. And as I say, he is very keen on coming back to Europe. But if America's where it is, he's a race driver and he's happy to drive anything, anywhere. Very refreshing approach from Jack Hawksworth. And interesting to hear today that Rob Wilson up at Bruntingthorpe is training J.I. Hildebrand. A lot of the IndyCar drivers coming over. He did the Andretti drivers, and Ryan Hunter-Ray, one of the drivers he was with, won at Barber at the weekend. I'm sure Ryan, a winner, a champion in his own right. But interesting to see these American drivers coming over, as well as the Formula One guys going up to Rob Wilson. We'll have Rob back on the show very soon talking about all that and more. Williams F1, very disappointing for the team, for everybody, to see how difficult that car has proved to be.
It's strange because during testing, hearing from the drivers, they were very good things to say about it. And when they put that new aero package on that had a very Red Bull-like side pod setup, they said the car was much better in the fast stuff, in the slow stuff, in corners, out of corners. And they turned up at Melbourne and they seemed to be all at sea, which seems very strange. Problem appears to be with Williams, seems to be based on the system, from what I can understand from the team. They went back to the launch specification exhausts, which were much more like McLaren style Coanda exhaust rather than the Red Bull setup that we saw late in testing. It's obviously unusual that teams revert back to older specifications, but if we remember last year, Williams were very late to the blown diffuser or the Coanda exhaust setup, even though they had the Coanda exhaust running at the Mugello test, which I think was something like April or May last year. So they had the setup working, and they brought it to Fridays repeatedly, trying to get it working. So it just seems to be something that they're fundamentally not grabbing with these exhausts, and being able to get the potential performance out of blowing the edges of the diffuser with the exhaust pipes. But again, they've got bits and pieces ready for China. No doubt there'll be bigger updates coming for the Spanish race. So hopefully they can turn the season around. Because I think, again, inherently their car looks right. Everything seems to be right on the car. It's just this one issue with the exhausts that they're having.
And I guess the question is, once the season starts, and with the limitation we have on wind tunnel testing and everything else, it's a question of how good the CFD is, I suppose, and how much they can very quickly digest information and results from those two races, throw it into the computer, and come up with an answer. But the pressure's really on for those guys.
The pressure is, and the problem is replicating the blown exhaust effect in a wind tunnel or in CFD is just very, very difficult. It's not an exact science, and it takes lots of resources. And Toro Rosso, one of the teams that have also said, we just don't have the money to completely understand this, so we have to do the best with what we've got. And I've heard lots of stories from people that work in the wind tunnels about some of the ridiculous things teams have to do to replicate the blown exhaust effect on the wind tunnel model. So Williams are up against it to solve this issue. It may mean that they have to go quite far backwards in removing the blown effect around the diffusers to get the car to be balanced, and forgo that potential downforce for a much better handling car.
Thanks for that, Scarbs. Nice tweet from F1 Fans Updates. Thank you for all your tweets. Great enthusiasts there. Their question is, have either of us seen the trailer for Rush? And what do we think of it if we have?
I have seen it. It came out on Monday morning. I was quite excited to see it because, I was a fan of F1 back in those days, and Niki Lauda probably was, for me, the better driver than James Hunt in terms of who I followed. It's Hollywood. Remembering the era myself, the film doesn't reflect it, but I think it's always great to have F1 in the cinemas, and we saw it with the Senna documentary, and obviously going back many more years, films like Grand Prix and that. So it's always a good thing for the sport.
It is a good thing, and it's a great thing that they're making a film. Actually, and they're not. None of it is archive material. It's really getting out there doing a film, which is a risky, difficult thing to do. It's all credit to Ron Howard for that.
And
however, having been a fan of Apollo 13, his movie, I imagined, and I still hope and imagine, that Rush is going to be about a lot of the debriefs, the briefings at McLaren and Ferrari, lots of behind-the-scenes stuff. Teddy Mayer, Daniel Odetto, Luca Montezemolo, Teddy Mayer. But I think I counted 5 mentions of the word death in the trailer. May have been 4, but it may have been 5. And I thought making movies, when they were motor racing movies, about death and glory, went out with Burt Reynolds and Rock Hudson, actually, to be honest. And I was a bit taken aback that this movie is very, very death and glory, and not, this is James Hunt, this is Niki Lauda, let's get into them and see how they work with their two teams, which is how I imagine the film, and still hope the film will be. I imagine it'll be an Apollo 13 type film, but I don't know. The trailer didn't smell like Apollo 13 to me. It smelled more like Rock Hudson. Anyway, what can I say? Right, let's move on to, the questions coming in here. Variante Alta, what a great Twitter name that is.
Great name.
We all miss Imola so much. Would you say, and this is getting us on to Mauricia. Actually, it's not Mauricia, it's Mauricia. Russian. Would you say Mauricia's advantage over Caterham is due to the addition of Kurz having had a fundamentally better car last year? And there's a few other points there saying how well Jules Bianchi's driving as well in the Mauricia. Yeah. So let's get on to Mauricia.
Well, I think when you talk about Mauricia, you almost inevitably talk about Caterham at the same time.
Let's talk about Caterham.
Somehow they seem inextricably linked.
Yeah.
In terms of the answer in the question is it to do with Kurz? Yeah, that's a big chunk of it. They found it's pretty much bolt-on performance now. It's not like it was back in 2009 where it was almost a handicap to have it on the car. So yeah, they've picked that up. But we have to say that Caterham is still running very much the car from last year. It won't be until Bahrain that they get their update. So there's a balancing act which I think will seesaw throughout the year. But Mauricia have done a fantastic job this year. I mean, I think the car certainly at its launch, looks overtly simple. And as we saw the car develop through testing and chatting to Pat Simmons and to John McQuillan, the designer there, understanding what the team have been going through over obviously since the original Virgin Racing days, and with Worth Research doing the design, and obviously then taking on the design of the team. When I went to Mauricia last year, there were no machines. There was no machining facilities at all at the factory. Everything was effectively an assembly shop. I don't want to underplay what they've done in the past. They're still building as a team, and all the designers have had to learn from a lot of their experience was in LMP racing and not in Formula One. They've had to learn how to bring the quality of the car up to the level of contemporary F1, which is an incredibly hard job. They're massively integrated and complicated cars. You can't just rock up one day and design a race-winning car. It just doesn't happen.
Love that wafer thin fin on the engine cover. Do you think that's in any way something that we might see on other cars?
It kind of exists on other cars in different ways already. I mean, obviously, remember we first saw the car first launch, had a very bulbous engine cover. Now you see this very tiny fin. The fin is only there to meet the legal requirements for the amount of bodywork space for sponsorship logos. I'm sure if the FIA said, "Oh, look, don't worry about it," most teams would carve that piece off in a flash. But yeah, it does look particularly spiky and aggressive, just having the the single plate running down the back of the engine cover there.
And the other thing, Scarbs, I sent you a picture of the DRS the passive DRS on the Lotus that you were quite interested in, right?
It was. We've seen, obviously, DRS since it was introduced in 2011, I think it was. Seems to have gone different ways of actually actuating how they lift the rear flap up. And initially, teams had actuators that was under the wing and pushed it up. And then lots of teams at the moment have a kind of a rocker arrangement which tilts it up. But Lotus and a few other teams now kind of simplified it and just had a very simple hydraulic slave cylinder that just shuts and pulls the wing up with a single rod, almost bluntly. There's no elegance to the solution, but it means you have a very neat and simple solution up there, and it's just nice to actually see the mechanics underneath these sleek fairings that they have.
The sleek fairings. And when I tweeted that out, Lotus actually came up to me in Malaysia and said, what's the big deal? We've had this on the car for a while. But that's the point. We don't actually see it. And there are differences in the mechanism, and that was the point of the tweeted picture. And it's always nice to go down to Parc Fermé on a Thursday at a Grand Prix, if you can get there, and see the cars. And they do have a lot of their bodywork removed.
I mean,
clothing removed.
I mean, Sauber have been very good that they've had this cut-in-half car, which they've been doing a few video clips of in the past week. And just to be able to see some of the detail in these cars, because they're exquisite. They've got so much detail, so much interest in them, that all you ever tend to see is just the shapely bodywork on the outside and not all the interesting bits in showing how they work. And something as straightforward as a DRS pod can actually be interesting when you get the time to look at it and explain it.
Here's a good question from @CameraDiner. What do we think is the contingency if war breaks out in North Korea, Asia region within the season?
I haven't given that an awful lot of thought, to be honest.
I mean, we'll go to Bahrain in a couple of weeks. Let's just take it easy at the moment. Well, I don't suppose there'll be a Korean Grand Prix, will there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that we won't be going to a war zone based on what's happened in previous races.
And we shouldn't laugh about it because obviously it's a terrible situation for many people in that part of the world. But Formula One's history is pretty good at sort of getting on with it and stiff upper lip. We will put on the race. The show will go on, as indeed I'm sure there'll be quite a lot of people objecting to the Bahrain Grand Prix again, but the race will be on. And
the race will be on. I mean, probably the Japanese race would be the one where there'd be the finer question, because obviously, although they're not directly involved in the conflict, they're not a million miles away, and Japan are somewhat worried about the escalation in the region.
Yeah. So. Well, good. And we've got 7 more questions coming in now, and I'll just try to grab some of them. This is from the F1 poet, who we all know and love, Ernie. And I'm going to be doing that thing for you very soon. Sorry, mate, I've been a bit under the gun recently. I've recently had to write a column for the Springfield magazine, a column for the BRDC magazine, all the F1 racing stuff that I've been asked to do, which is fun. I'm not complaining about any of this, but it's all quite... Anyway, I'll be on to it. Anyway, his question is... Actually, it's not really a question. It's a statement. I've spotted 3 new white hairs on Scarbs. Is he still stressed at identifying the drivers?
Yes.
There's a one-word answer there for you. Okay. Well, we'll move smoothly on there. Chris, and she knows who she is, from Argentina. Chris, I hope everything's going well there in Buenos Aires after all the flooding. Cool watching you both at F1 Racing Mag Studio. Thank you very much indeed. It's lovely to be here as well. And the F1 poet asked another question, slightly more seriously now. It is said that Pirelli may be reviewing their compounds. Do you believe they will make changes to them? And I think we should make that the last question. But Pirelli have come under a lot of attack since Malaysia, I think unfairly, and I went into a big rant about that last week. We all know that there are other tyre companies out there, but Pirelli are the company putting money into Formula One and putting money into the promotion of Formula One very creatively as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it behoves the drivers and the teams always to speak about Pirelli in a positive way, in my view. But nonetheless, we know that the drivers did complain publicly after the race in Malaysia. They said they didn't enjoy the race. It was boring and they were driving at 90% or 80%. Scarbs, do you think that Pirelli will actually go back to square one and start building new compounds? I find that hard to believe.
I don't think they're going to build any new tyres for this season, but they may. I suppose the obvious thing would be revise the choice and take slightly less risky choices of tyres to races. And I hope they don't, because it's a facet of the race that I find absolutely fascinating, and it's down to the drivers to manage the tyres that they are given, that the Pirelli have made on instructions from the FIA.
Yeah.
So it's not a Pirelli problem, it's an FIA problem.
And the FIA on instructions from the fans of the world who demanded more overtaking and more pit stops. So,
Absolutely.
you know,
On the
blame
F1
the
Racing
fans,
poll.
actually.
It's just F1 varies. I mean, we was talking earlier. It had been under the purely Bridgestone era. It was purely a chassis formula. Everyone had similar engines. Everyone had the same tyres. So it was down to who had the best chassis. Well, that's not great for the drivers, is it? And then we've obviously had other areas when it's been a fuel economy formula. Next year it's going to become an engine formula where your best engine's going to win. It's not going to be the tyres or the chassis. F1 ebbs and flows, and at the moment, I think.
And if you took Nico Rosberg's drive and Mark Webber's drive in isolation from Malaysia, you wouldn't have said there were any issues at all with tyres.
Yeah.
I know Mark wasn't enjoying it, but he didn't actually look bad in the car, and it was a straightforward race win for him, Mark Webber, until he was told to back off, and we all know what happened then. We're back to square one. That's how he came into the show. And so a big thanks initially to Infinity for that little bit of video, and to all the contributors to the show, to Jack Hawksworth, to Stoffel Vandoorne, and indeed to Craig Scarborough here. We've gone through the entire grid. I don't think we've forgotten anybody, have we?
I think we've got through everyone eventually.
Everybody. We haven't got to the FIA yet and scrutineering, but that's another matter. But Scarbs, great pleasure to have you on the show.
Peter.
We'll be back again next week, by which time, of course, the UBS Chinese Grand Prix will have happened. So we'll be looking back at that race, and we'll be looking forward to the Bahrain Grand Prix. Don't miss it. That's next Wednesday, the Racer's Edge, brought to you in association with F1 Racing Magazine. The empty office behind us, but then I should explain that it is 8:15, so we can't even expect the most prolific journalists to be there writing at this hour. Great to have had you with us for this hour from our point of view. See you next week.